When people picture a flood, they picture water. Nobody pictures this. In January of 1919, a wall of syrup 25 feet tall tore through a Boston neighborhood at over 30 miles an hour, and by the time it stopped moving, 21 people were dead. This is the true story of the Boston Molasses Flood, and the part almost nobody tells you: it wasn't really an accident. It was a warning, ignored for 4 straight years. The tank went up in 1915, on Commercial Street in the North End, built fast because World War I had made industrial alcohol valuable. Molasses could be distilled into it, and alcohol meant munitions. 50 feet tall, 90 feet across, holding over 2 million gallons. The company building it skipped basic safety checks to make its shipping deadline. Almost immediately, it leaked. Neighborhood kids would show up with pails and scrape sweet syrup straight off the outside of the tank. The company's answer wasn't to fix it. They painted the tank brown, so the leaks wouldn't show. One of their own engineers raised the alarm directly to management. He was ignored. The tank kept groaning, kept leaking, for 4 more years. January 15, 1919, was unusually warm. The temperature had jumped more than 40 degrees in a day, after a hard freeze. Inside the tank, warmer molasses arriving by ship was now sitting on top of a dense, cold layer left over from the freeze, and the pressure between the two was doing something. The rushed 1915 construction was never built to survive. At around 12:30 in the afternoon, workers on the street heard a sound like machine gun fire. Rivets popping loose, one after another. Then the tank simply came apart. Over 2 million gallons of molasses hit the street in an instant, a wave 25 feet high moving at an estimated 35 miles an hour, fast enough that grown adults could not outrun it. It picked up a loaded freight car and threw it. It knocked a steel support out from under Boston's elevated railway, dropping the track. It flattened a local firehouse with firefighters still inside. And then, as it slowed and cooled, it did something almost worse than the impact. It thickened. What started as a wave that crushed people ended as a substance dense enough to trap them exactly where they fell, unable to pull free, some of them within sight of rescuers who could not reach them in time. 21 people died, more than 150 were injured. Rescue crews spent days wading through molasses to find survivors and recover the dead. Boston Harbor itself ran brown with syrup for months afterward. Cleanup crews used salt water from fireboats, sand, and eventually just time, because nothing dissolved molasses fast. For decades afterward, North End residents swore that on a hot summer day, if the wind was right, you could still catch the faint smell of molasses coming up from the pavement. Whether that's literally true or just the kind of thing a neighborhood tells itself after a disaster like this, nobody's ever fully settled. Here's the detail most retellings skip entirely. For almost a century, nobody could fully explain why the wave moved as fast as it did, and then trapped people the way it did, in the same event. In 2016, a team of Harvard researchers actually modeled it. Molasses is what's called a non-Newtonian fluid. Its resistance to flowing changes depending on how much force is hitting it. Under the sudden violent pressure of the tank rupturing, it behaved almost like water, fast and unstoppable. Within about 40 seconds, as that force dropped off and the January cold set in, it thickened by roughly 1,000 times, turning into something closer to wet cement. The same physical property that let it kill people at highway speed is what then kept the survivors from escaping. What happened next actually mattered more than the disaster itself. Over 100 victims and family members sued the company, United States Industrial Alcohol, and the company's first move was to blame the whole thing on anarchist saboteurs. No evidence for it, they just floated it to the press. The court didn't buy it. A court-appointed auditor spent years going through the tank's original construction records and found exactly what that ignored engineer had warned about back in 1915. The design had never been properly checked by a qualified engineer, the steel was too thin for what it needed to hold, and the company knew it was leaking for years and chose paint over repair. The company paid out roughly $628,000 in damages, worth somewhere around $8 million today. More importantly, the case helped push Massachusetts, and eventually much of the country, toward requiring an actual licensed engineer to sign off on structural calculations before something like that tank could ever be built again. So the next time you hear molasses used as a stand-in for something slow, remember this: for one afternoon in Boston, it moved faster than anyone could run. It took 21 lives, and it rewrote how America builds things, so that no company could quietly paint over a warning ever again.